All right, I think we should go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. And so I'm going to go ahead and get this kicked off. Tracy, how are you? Happy New Year. I haven't seen you yet this year, but I've talked to you a bunch.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Hanging out in the office. It's a beautiful day today. We've got a lot of sunshine going on, so I'm happy to see that. It's cold though.
Yeah, it's chilly. It's a proper winter day. I am kicking myself because I scheduled this thing right during the Supreme Court's oral argument session. So right before this, I was listening to the live stream of that. They're hearing arguments today about the OSHA ETS and the healthcare vaccine mandate, and we'll go over all that in just a second. But it was fascinating, and I should have scheduled this in the afternoon so I could listen to the rest of it. But anyway, that's just that's what I do these days, is listen to the arguments about this kind of stuff. All right, so today it's a new year. Happy 2022, everybody. You've made it to the end of the first work week in 2022. Hopefully everybody out there is healthy and safe and happy. We're going to bounce around a little bit today, as we are known to do. We're going to talk about, of course, we'll talk about COVID-related things, CDC, OSHA, and the courts. We also will talk about how to track COVID-related information in iSolved. We'll touch on the ERC, and we'll touch on minimum wage increases and how, if you're one of our clients, iSolved has a handy way for you to make sure that you are paying your folks the correct hourly rates based on their locality. So that said, as usual, we are recording this webinar, and we will post the recording and the slides on our website at dominionpayroll.com on the COVID-19 resource page. If you've forgotten how to find this page, it's still accessible from the bar that's along the top of the homepage. And there you can navigate to the webinar page. We also have a resource page. And if you have any questions, you can't find what you're looking for, you can email us at questions@dominionpayroll.com. Today, during this webinar, if you could use the Q&A function and not the chat, that way we can record your questions after the fact and keep them on file for us to make sure that we have them. But if you don't feel comfortable sharing today or asking your question in this format, or something occurs to you after the fact, you can send your question to questions@dominionpayroll.com, and that goes directly to Tracy, and she will share it with me if she's feeling like sharing it. Anything else?
Which I'm sure I feel like sharing it. Okay.
Which I'm sure she will, because Tracy gets a lot of questions. Anything else to add, Tracy, before we jump in?
No, and please really ask anything that you can think of that goes along with this. I was on a call yesterday with a California client, and we did some deep digging into all the kind of things that go around the California OSHA ETS. So anything that comes up, please don't hesitate to put it out there. We are trying to expand our own knowledge as well as yours. So, there's probably things that we just don't know about yet. So I'd love to, be prodded to go in a direction to find out some more information.
That's right. I witnessed that. I heard it. You heard it here, folks. Send us the difficult questions and we'll try and figure them out. And sometimes we have to say, you know what, you might need to get an attorney to wade through this, but for the most part, we can try and track it down, especially in those compliance heavy states like California.
Yeah.
So good point. Thank you, Tracy. Okay. So we're going to start out with the pandemic, and my two favorite government agencies, the CDC and OSHA, they have come under such scrutiny and fire during this time. The CDC during the entire pandemic, and OSHA sprang into action midway through 2021. It was basically silent before that and during the pandemic. And then once Delta hit, and then of course Omicron, then OSHA has become a major player on the front lines, and the CDC continues to be, as you all know, an agency that's also on the front lines. However, what they share in terms of their responsibility for this pandemic, they also, not responsibility for it, but for issuing guidelines and rules, they also share the fact that people either really love them or really dislike them, and they get made fun of a lot. And there's a whole the CDC says thing on Twitter right now, which is kind of funny. But needless to say, I am very glad that I do not work at one of these organizations right now, because it's got to be a tough road. So I'm going to do my best today to update you all on what's the latest is, and it does change pretty quickly. So this all could be different on Monday. Of course, we will do our best to keep you informed. Okay, so as many of you guys probably are aware, the CDC changed its guidance in late September around isolation times. What the highlights there were, and I encourage you to go to the website and read the full page, but the highlights there is what they're saying is that if you're asymptomatic and you've been exposed or tested positive, then the recommended time for isolation has been reduced from 10 days to 5 days, followed by 5 days of wearing a mask when around others. And I'm interpreting that when around others to mean when around others everywhere, not just in the grocery store, but also at home. The change is motivated by science demonstrating that the majority of COVID transmission occurs early in the course of illness, generally in the 1 to 2 days prior to onset of symptoms, and then the 2 to 3 days after. So therefore, if you test positive, you should isolate for 5 days. And if asymptomatic at that time, then you may leave isolation if you can continue to mask for 5 days to minimize the risk of infecting others. So you could be asymptomatic. If that's the case, then you don't have to wait 10 full days as long as those symptoms stay away, but you do need to mask afterwards if you aren't already. So that was the change in December, and you might have heard that the CDC came under fire for that because a lot of people saw that as quote unquote pandering to the business communities so we could get people back to work in a shorter amount of time. Whether or not that's true, I am not here to comment on that, but that is what they did in December. And then, still in December, they had guidance for folks who are unvaccinated or are more than 6 months out from their second mRNA dose, which is Pfizer or Moderna, or more than 2 months after the J&J dose and not yet boosted. They said that these folks who fall into this category should quarantine for 5 days, followed by strict mask use for an additional 5 days. I'm assuming this is still in the asymptomatic category. If a 5-day quarantine is not feasible, it is imperative that an exposed person wear a well-fitting mask at all times when around others for 10 days after exposure. And they have a couple other qualifiers down here. People who have been boosted do not need to quarantine, but should still wear that mask for 10 days. And then for everybody who's been exposed, best practice would also include a test at day 5 after exposure. If symptoms do end up occurring, individuals should immediately quarantine until a negative test confirms symptoms are not attributable to COVID-19. So you could have a cold. There are other illnesses out there. That's what they're saying here is that what we need to rule out is that it's not COVID. However, what I haven't gone into this, I don't have a slide on it during this webinar, but it bears mentioning that they don't, at least in this language, they don't talk about which test you should take. And I know we're all aware now of how far out you have to schedule a PCR test and how quickly the at-home rapid tests are flying off the shelves. So, just asking someone to test at a certain time really depends on when they can get their hands on a test and what kind of test we're talking about. So I unfortunately don't have the answers to that. I've heard and read a lot of different opinions. In my opinion, if that's worth anything, the rapid tests are really good at telling you if you're contagious right that moment. But there's still some debate about whether or not they're 100% accurate, and you do really need to follow those instructions to the letter. And then if you can get a PCR just to confirm that any of those viral proteins have been in your system at all, I think that would be a really good way to just confirm or deny that you have had COVID. All right, so then just this past week, the CDC put out some new language, which is making things potentially better or worse. I can't really tell, but they say now that if an individual has access to a test and wants to test, the best approach is to use an antigen test or a rapid test toward the end of the 5-day isolation period. Collect the test sample only if you are fever-free for 24 hours without the use of medication and your symptoms have improved. If your test result is positive, you should continue to isolate until day 10. If it's negative, you can end isolation, but continue to wear a well-fitting mask around others at home and in public until day 10. And there they are specific about wearing that mask at home as well as in public. So this is, I believe, in response to a whole bunch of social, political, news, media pressure around this test situation and why it's so hard to get tests, and if we knew that the test would be so important, why don't we all have free tests provided to us, or at least why aren't there more on the shelf? So this is the latest as of, I believe, Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. Tracy, do you have any thoughts on our questions about this CDC guidance?
No, I think that most people are following the different ones. There is a question out here, so let me read that to you. We have a hard time figuring out what to do in same household exposures to COVID. When should the quarantine start for the employee when they have a family member who is sick? Do their 5 days start on the day the family member tested positive, or after the family member finishes their first 5 days of isolation? So before you answer that, I can see the confusion with this, because if you remember back when it was 10 days, the quarantine started after the initial person with COVID had their 10 days. Then the next person was 10 days after that, because of the way the exposure worked. The exposure is a little different now as far as CDC is concerned. So take it away, Les.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Back in, I don't even remember, but I do remember putting the slide together about how it was the end of the quarantine for the initial sick person was the beginning of the quarantine for the housemate, which meant, potentially a 20 to 24 day or 28 day window. But with this compressed time period now, and again, they're really stressing symptoms versus non-symptoms. To me, this would cut the math in half, at least for asymptomatic folks. But then wearing that mask when you get back out in the world is important. But I would have to go in and dig a little deeper just to get some definitive answers, and I can post those on our website. But
I'm thinking it's going to be the 5 days after the family member tests positive, to be honest with you, because I think the way that the CDC has put it out there is that you're most contagious 2 days prior to symptoms and 3 days after the symptoms start. So, if someone gets a symptom, you're obviously, most people are not testing prior to having symptoms. They're just going along their daily life. So it's when you actually start to have symptoms that you're testing. So I would think that even if you tested on the very first day of symptoms, then anybody you exposed from that day, it would be 5 days from that point. You would probably know if you had COVID at that point. And maybe you should test then.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, because you're right. The Omicron variant does move more quickly in terms of that contagion period.
So Rich just piped in and said, I just joined. I'm highly confused now. I could swear I just read 5 days after I test positive. That's correct. But the question was, what do you do about people who've been exposed to that person who tested positive? When does their quarantine start? So that's what we're talking about here. So yes, as far as if you get tested, it is 5 days, and CDC has changed that to 5 days, as long as you're symptom free at the end of that 5 days.
Right. The magic window, it used to be 10, well, it used to be 14, then it went down to 10, and now it's down to 5. So that's the general rule, but they're still saying, Rich, that you need to wear a mask after that. And to the extent that this reduction in the isolation period time frame is sort of controversial, as controversial as it is confusing, it's good news in the sense that we no longer need to keep employees out of the workplace
Right.
for as long. However, they are still saying to mask up.
Right.
Now you as an employer can say, you know what, we feel more comfortable observing the more conservative approach, and you can keep people out for as long as you want. Now whether or not you're paying them, that's a whole nother story. But this is the bare minimum now.
Okay.
So you can
Well,
go over and above if you want.
So Rich is questioning what you have in that third paragraph where it says, if your test result is positive, you should continue to isolate until day 10. But that's not actually true anymore.
Yeah, I know, but I grabbed this right from the CDC site. So let me see.
I thought it was 5 days and then wear a mask for 5 days if you didn't have any symptoms. So
yeah,
I'm
I'll
almost
go back
positive.
and look at it.
I'm going to look at it while you're chatting on
Yeah,
about
look
other
at
things.
it. I pulled it. Yep, I look at it. They have it highlighted, the new language. They have it highlighted, Tracy, on that page. And I think it says updated as of January 4th or 5th or whatever. Let me know, because hopefully I didn't cut off something on that sentence, but that's a good call. All right, I'm going to keep moving and we'll get back to that. Thank you, Rich. Okay. So shifting from the CDC to OSHA, the emergency temporary standard, hopefully you guys know what that is by now, but I'll go into it in just a second.
Okay, hold on. I found it.
You did? Okay,
Yeah.
Hold on, everybody. Let me go back.
People with COVID-19 should isolate for 5 days. And if they are asymptomatic or their symptoms are resolving without fever for 24 hours, follow that by 5 days of wearing a mask. So it's isolate for 5, wear a mask for 5 for people with COVID.
Is that from the language they updated this week?
It says CDC updates and shortens recommended isolation. Okay. No, but it is from December 27th, 10 days ago.
All right, well, there's one that's more recent.
All right, let me find that.
You keep researching and I'll keep going.
Okay, all right, sorry.
Thank you. That's why we do this. That's why we do this with 2 of us and not 1. All right, thank you, Tracy. Okay, so right this minute, the U.S. Supreme Court is hearing arguments for and against the OSHA ETS, which if allowed to go forward, will require all private employers with more than 100 employees to have a fully vaccinated workforce with a weekly testing option. Or you could flip that and look at it as it's a testing mandate with a vaccine opt-out. Either way, there are 2 options. One, the person can be vaccinated, or if not, then they need to produce a negative weekly test. The Supreme Court is also hearing arguments today regarding the vaccine requirement for healthcare workers, and that one, there is no option. It's vaccine or not. What this means for us is that the Supreme Court is going to make some sort of decision about whether or not to lift or to let these go forward. Essentially, they've been tied up in the courts. A couple of district courts have issued what's called a stay because based on multiple states filing appeals, and essentially the argument is that OSHA doesn't have the authority, the statutory authority to have this, to basically mandate this rule. So we'll see what they say. I'm not sure exactly when they're going to issue their opinion on this, but the first date that comes into play for the ETS is January 10th, which is Monday. So presumably they'll rule pretty quickly. There was a third rule, and that was for federal contractors. You'll recall that was the vaccine mandate for federal contractors. As far as I know, that's still held up. Well, there's been no further action since the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals voted earlier this week 3-1 to uphold a ruling by a federal judge in Kentucky, which said that the president does not have legal authority to use procurement law to require vaccines for federal contractors. So that's a different ball of wax. That's not going through OSHA. That's going through federal procurement laws. So that's a whole different argument. I don't know where that's going to go after this. Okay, so the ETS, which was issued back in November, applies to employers with 100 or more total employees, regardless of where they work. It's an aggregate. The essential component is that it requires any workers who remain unvaccinated originally as of January 4th to produce a negative COVID-19 test result on at least a weekly basis before coming to work. This date has been changed to February 9th. And again, we'll see if it actually is the law of the land after the Supreme Court decides.
And
but
that 100 employees does include remote workers, it includes everybody. So even if your workplace is 100% remote and you have 100 employees or more, you still have to comply with determining the vaccine status of your employees. Now, they won't have to do testing because if they stay completely remote, they won't have to do the testing, but you will have to determine their vaccine status and show that you're complying with that.
That's right. That's a good point. And I'll go into more detail on that in a second, but it does include all of your workforce in the US. If you have overseas workers, you don't have to add them to that count. You also have to ensure that individuals who are not fully vaccinated wear a face mask while inside the workplace beginning December 5th. That has now changed to Monday, January 10th. You have to provide up to 4 hours of paid time off for the time it takes for workers to get vaccinated, and you may not deduct that from their PTO bank. And then also provide up to 2 days of paid sick time to recover if the employee is under the weather post-vaccination. This time can be taken from their existing sick leave, but not vacation. And Tracy and I were talking about this week. What if they don't have any what if either they don't have any sick leave left, or there is no sick leave policy, separate sick leave policy? A lot of companies have combined PTO policies. I would err on the side of caution and just go ahead and pay them for that sick day that they're out post-vaccination. If it becomes something longer than a day or so, workers' comp might be able to have to get involved if it's like a serious side effect. But if it's just them feeling generally crummy for a day, I would just go ahead and pay them this for a day off. Now, the big thing here, and this bullet probably should be elevated toward higher in the slide, but the ETS says that employers do not have to shoulder the costs for testing unless you want to or are able to. That was a big question mark between when the ETS was announced in September and when it was actually put up on the OSHA site and published. But because this can be considerable, the cost of testing if you don't have symptoms, or if it's, it's commonly called return to work testing by labs and test providers. Typically, that's not covered by insurance, and there is an out-of-pocket cost. And so if we're looking at multiple employees having to do this on a weekly basis, that can be cost prohibitive. I don't know. I mean, that's obviously a big argument against the ETS in the court system, and obviously gives employers a lot of headache. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out. If they do allow this to go forward, maybe there's going to be some assistance for that. I don't know anymore. Have you read anything more about that, Tracy?
I have not. There's a ton of questions in here. I think we should probably address some of them.
Okay.
So hold on. Getting back to like the CDC guidelines, Andrew said, would it be possible to have the CDC guidance guidelines for scenarios on when to isolate asymptomatic or with symptoms, exposure to someone who tests positive, et cetera, put into a flow chart? If this, then that, with all the different responses, actions to take, a visual guide would be very helpful. I agree with that. I think we can put that together and get that out on our website. So let's look at getting a flow chart. Are you good with that?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful for everyone, including ourselves. All right, so here's another question from Lisa. Says, but here in Virginia, doesn't the VOSH ETS say employees should mask unless they are in a private office, regardless of vaccination status? I haven't seen an update following the fourth quarter, but that was what was in the one issued in September.
Yeah, good point, Lisa. Here in Virginia, there was an ETS that did require masks. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if any, because that came out the same week as this did, if I recall correctly, in September. And I don't think anyone has enforced it. I think it's been, I haven't heard a lot of updates on it, but it's a great question, and I will look into that.
Audrey said, how should we handle COVID sick time for companies under 50 employees? Do they have to use PTO? I guess credits have expired. So that's on a completely different burner, I guess, on the stove. But so if you're under 50 employees, there are no more COVID related government programs to help pay for sick time off. Those expired on the 30th of September, and they haven't put anything else in place, which is, I know it's unfortunate because a lot of companies, small companies, maybe weren't affected by the Delta variant. Oh gosh, variant. There we go. I wanted to put virus and variant together, and it came out.
I got
virant.
it. Yeah, I like it.
So anyway, so now with Omicron going through, everybody seems to be getting it, and the workforce is diminishing because of that. Yeah, there's nothing in place to help you pay for that, unfortunately. Rich says, it does not include people who work in complete isolation. Main question for ETS is, how do we keep records? Do Dominion systems help us do so? Reach out to our account manager, I guess. So as far as people who work in complete isolation, they do count in your employee count, and on whether or not you are a company of 100 employees or more and have to abide by the OSHA ETS. That's where those remote people work, fall into this. They don't fall into the fact, do you have to collect information on them, like the testing and all of that? So no, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
The main question about go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, I skipped ahead to a couple slides to the exceptions for the employees. Yes, they do count in your employee count, but those who work entirely alone, 100% remotely, or work exclusively outdoors, they don't have to comply with the vaccine or test decision.
Right.
But they're really clear about what exclusively outdoors means.
As far as keeping the records, we have a great solution in our system, and we will be showing you that in just a second. But yes, we have a lot that you can do within our system that you can give access to your employees to, and they can upload their vaccine card, they can upload their test results. If you're using our new user interface, which is absolutely free to you, if your employees use that, they can upload all of that information right to the confidential PHI. If you use the old platform, your employees will be uploading to the old platform. They'll only have access to upload to EE uploads, and then you'll have to have somebody go in to move that to confidential PHI, because you can't have health information just out there in the system like that. So yeah, we're going to show you that in just a minute. You can just reach out to customer service. We'll send you a macro that will be asking you questions like, which of these would you like to have included on your platform? And do you need reporting? Because we have all kinds of reports that we can do for you. So I'm really pleased with the solution that we have for this. Catherine says, what if you just have a bank of PTO that's used for both vacation and sick leave? I think you answered that, but you want to go over it again?
Yeah. In terms of recovering from COVID, so the easy one is if it's recovering from a vaccine, the ETS says that you need to give them to paid time off to recover from the vaccine. I would just say, let's just pay them for that day. It's one day, no big deal. If it's for the vaccine, for being COVID positive or for isolation, that's tough because, as Tracy said earlier, there are no tax credits anymore for that, at least not as of now. We haven't heard any news of any coming down the pike. So I think the short answer is nobody is saying you have to provide paid time off for COVID. If you want to, if you can, if it works out, that's one of the reasons why the CDC, in my opinion, shortened that isolation time, because employers were just like, we can't operate like this. Yeah.
I think she's asking you about PTO what do you do for people who are recovering from the vaccine? If that actually goes into effect, they get that 4 hours or they get that up to 16 hours, right? For recovery from the vaccine? 2
Yeah,
days.
4 hours to get vaccinated and then up to 2 days or 16 hours to recover.
Yeah. So if you don't have sick leave, you have that, you only have a PTO, then what do you do?
I think you just pay them. I think you put a code in iSolved that says, vaccine recovery time and pay
And you
them for that
track it
time.
for yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. Rose said, my understanding is that in Virginia, the testing cost falls on the employer.
That's a great question.
I thought it did not.
I've never
don't know the
seen
answer
that.
to that.
Yeah, I've never seen that, Rose. I'd love, if you have anything that you want to send us, like a link or something, let us know. I'd love to research that more. I have not heard that, but and also some individual localities have different rules and regs too, around paid sick leave, as well as maybe paying for testing. So that makes it a bit more complicated.
There are a bunch of free testing sites too. In fact, today one opened up at RIR in Virginia, in Richmond area. So there's a lot of free testing sites that you can direct your employees to.
Well, and no matter what happens at the state level, Rose, no matter what's true at the state level, if the ETS, the OSHA ETS is allowed to go forward, that will supersede any state level rules.
I think if your state is stricter, then you have to go with that.
No, well, the ETS actually, hold on a second. The ETS actually says it supersedes any existing state or local requirements that limited an employer's ability to require COVID vaccinations, COVID testing, or face coverings. I read that it supersedes any other COVID related.
But that says limits.
Rules. But it also means that.
Yeah, but what about places like California where they have like much stricter codes?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look into each state.
Rich says, what happens with employees who choose not to test, not being able to work? Can they claim unemployment?
I would say no.
Because they're choosing not to work.
Yeah, there is work
they don't
for them.
Comply. Yeah.
Right.
All right, now there's a couple things in the chat, so hold on. Based on what I've seen, the CDC has not updated the original page, but just released new guidelines without changing the quarantine isolation page to match their updates. I agree with that. That's what it looks like. Does the number of employees include contact employees? I think that should be contract employees. It does not. No, it doesn't. The contract employees, aren't they claimed by their, well, I don't know. What if you have 1099s? You have to claim those in your employee count or no?
Nope, you don't.
Okay. All right. Brad says, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say independent contractors, 1099s, staffing agencies, you still have the right to ask them to comply with whatever your on-site rules are.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Okay. Brad says, something I just saw, you have the option to retest after 5 days, and if positive, isolate for 5 more days. That CDC guidance changed the last days of December. It now says that people who test positive for COVID-19 should isolate for 5 days. After that, if they don't have symptoms or their symptoms are resolving, they're without fever. Okay, that's the thing we just said, that they should follow the 5 days of wearing the mask. Okay, so we're good there. Anita says, Virginia law does not allow companies to make employers pay for medical testing.
Okay.
And then Rich says, creates legal conflict. No, company not paying, employee doesn't have to pay. If that's true, what happens then? Oh, Lord.
Well, I mean, and that's a big, I mean, I'm trying to think of an example of something else that like a private employer would ask their employees to get like some sort of similar thing. You know, I can, in the healthcare profession, that's obviously a different story, but I'm trying to think of an analogy and I can't think of one. I mean, flu shots, I don't know if people, you know, I know employers routinely test for that or pay for that kind of thing, but that's a different type of thing. Well, let me look into Virginia at least, and then I'll read up more about the ETS, the federal level, and see if that does supersede state
Okay.
or local requirements or not.
Yeah. We'll probably do a webinar next week then, because
Yeah,
we'll have the results of the Supreme Court, and maybe all of this is mute.
that's right. Yeah, this could all be just washed away. I don't know. But we still need to get to the bottom of the CDC stuff. I feel like a flow chart would be really helpful. And then
Yes.
we need to update it as
Yeah.
many times as they ask us to.
Rich said, by the way, VDH has been tremendous in taking questions via phone. Best government agency responsiveness ever, especially if compared to the poor VEC.
Oh, I know. I
feel
agree
bad
with you.
for them.
I think VDH has been great, and I no comment on the VEC. We have some good friends there that we know have been working hard. But back to that unemployment question, I'll float that by them too, and just get an update from them about that.
That'd be great.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
We're good for a second.
Okay.
Oh, never. There's one more.
Okay.
Sorry.
No.
Rose said, I believe it was in the Virginia temporary ETS. And then she said, for purposes of this section, COVID-19 testing is considered a medical examination. Employers shall not require employees to pay for the cost of COVID-19 testing for return to work determinations.
Yeah, I remember that, Rose, and I thank you for bringing that back up, because I honestly don't know that ETS has even been enforced by the Northam administration. I mean, I haven't heard of any anecdotal or other type of data around that. However, that's not to say that it's not real. I do still think, though, if the OSHA ETS goes forward, I think that's going to be the law of the land in terms of that paying for testing, but we'll have to see. We'll have to do some more research. And I don't know, Rose, if you've actually been paying for testing, like what's been happening in your world out on the front lines, but or if employees are even if they know that if the VOSH standard even is out there, I'm not sure. But we do need to look more into it. I mean, I could see, you know, if it's a small company and they got to have a couple people that need tests, and I can see that being feasible. But I mean, if you're a covered employer under this ETS with 100 or more employees, I can't imagine they would make you pay for all these tests. I don't see it happening, but it would just be too much. So we'll see. We'll get to the bottom of it. Thank you, Rose. Okay, we covered most of the bullets on this slide already. Did want to point out the second bullet here. We all are well aware about that there are medical or religious exemptions that are possible from being vaccinated. However, these people are, even if they're exempt from the vaccine, they still need to produce a negative weekly test and wear a mask. So they're not, they might be exempt from the vaccine, but they're not exempt from the testing and mask requirement. The original ETS said that COVID testing cannot be performed at home unless an authorized telehealth proctor observes the employee take the test and reads the results. Since then, there have been way more at-home test kits on the market. And so a lot of them have a digital timestamp or have an app that tracks results. If they have that type of at-home test, then no proctor is necessary, because you can verify that test result and time and date electronically. We talked about employee count, including all domestic employees, including part-time and fully remote employees. Temporary and seasonal workers do count. Independent contractors do not. And then staffing agencies with more than 100 employees are responsible for their staff and must comply. If you use a staffing agency, but you don't have more than 100 employees without the staffing agency, you don't have to comply, but you are allowed to require the staffing agency to comply with any of your on-site policies. So that's an interesting one there too. If someone already has had COVID, the ETS says that they are not required to undergo COVID-19 testing for 90 days following the date of their positive test or diagnosis. So I guess, Tracy, that's something else they could track in iSolved maybe. I don't know how that would work, but okay. And then we did touch on this earlier, but
so hold on. So if you have an employee who tested positive for COVID, they don't have to submit to the weekly testing for 90 days?
That's what it says, but I'll look and make sure that they didn't change it. Because when it was written back in October, it was published in early November, but it was written October, September, October. You know, it's been 2-3 months since then. So perhaps the science has changed, but as far as I know, this is still the rule.
Okay. I just didn't know how that fit into the weekly testing.
Yeah, I think that the consensus is that the tests results are null and void because typically they can't be reinfected. So within that window. Okay, and again, these are the exceptions to the vaccine or test rule. This is pretty self-explanatory, but anyone who works entirely alone, anyone who's 100% remote, although if you come into the office for any reason, they must wear a mask and provide a negative test taken within the last 7 days. And then the outdoor ones are pretty strict rules around that. If they do come inside to use the restroom or get a drink of water, it needs to be what they say, de minimis use of indoor spaces. And they can't linger. And also, if you're in the construction business, they say that outdoors does not include buildings under construction where substantial portions of the structure are in place. So you really want to be, it needs to be a house that's, you know, partially framed, but not fully drywalled because they need to have airflow. And that is the extent of my construction knowledge. Thank you, everybody. All right, this one's a little tricky. I don't know that I fully understand their logic here, but basically what they're saying is if you had 100 and more employees on November 5th, then you have to comply with this standard regardless of what your employee count is now. If it's fluctuated, if you've lost employees, I think what they're saying is that they don't want to have to mess around with keeping track of who's at 100 and who's under and who's over. So this third bullet, if the employer has fewer than 100 employees on the effective date of the standard, then it would not apply to that employer as of the effective date. However, if that same employer subsequently hires more workers and hits the 100 employee threshold for coverage, then all of a sudden they become covered and they stay covered. They stay that way until the end of the ETS. So if they have an example here at the bottom, if an employer has 103 employees on the effective date of the standard, but then loses 4 within the next month, that employer would continue to be covered by the ETS. Does that make sense? I think it's okay. Okay, so the other thing is the ETS as it stands now requires by Monday that you have a written policy in place, either requiring all employees to be vaccinated or allowing employees to choose between getting vaccinated or testing for COVID weekly and wearing a face covering indoors. They do have a handy template on their resource page under implementation. You may choose to have one policy for certain workers and another for different workers. But as with any employment decision, this distinction should be made on legitimate business reasons. So I'm assuming that a lot of you already have some policies in place around COVID-related things. If not, it might be good to go ahead and map that out just in case this goes through for those of you who have more than 100 employees. And then state plans, this goes back to our state versus federal jurisdiction, power, et cetera. More than half of the states, I believe, in the US have what are called state plans, which means the OSHA, federal OSHA has allowed them to have a state-based OSHA. And Virginia is one of those states. What they're saying here is that the state plans are required to adopt and enforce occupational safety and health standards that are at least as effective as federal OSHA's requirements. So I don't know where the paying for testing would fall into that. I don't know, how you define paying for tests as effective or not. I can see that applying to masks and vaccines, but I don't know about where testing falls. But in any case, state plans have about 30 days, I think it's 30 days, to amend their existing standard to be identical or at least as effective as the new standard at the federal level. So even though your state might have a state OSHA, they still have to play nicely in the sandbox with federal OSHA and amend their language to be at least as effective as the federal one.
Rich has a comment about that. Template. He said the handy template has plenty of incomplete information that implies legal support. It's not so great. Blanks around religious exemption standards, what medical exceptions are acceptable, etc.
So he's saying the links are, it's incomplete and the links are broken?
No. The link's not broken. He said the handy template has plenty of incomplete information that implies legal support. So it's not as great as here, just put your stuff in. It says there's blanks around a religious exemption standards or what medical exceptions are acceptable.
Oh,
it's not as helpful.
Well, if he needs help with language for it, the template for his policy, he can let us know. We're happy to help. Or if they have an HR person or an employment lawyer, they can also help. I know those templates are sometimes not as direct and clear as they could be. Well, I'll look at it.
It's got to fit everybody too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's true.
That's why.
Yeah, no, thanks for checking that out, Rich. I'll look at it again and see if maybe we can come up with a version of our own that makes more sense. I mean, I think they just need to, they're not saying you have to use that template. They just need, the only thing they're really saying is that you have to have a written policy that you distribute. Not only do you have to have it written, but it needs to be distributed to employees.
I just think it's difficult because, this is not everybody's wheelhouse. It's probably not most people's wheelhouse. And then you need some kind of scaffolding to build off of. And if the government is not providing something that makes it at least somewhat clear, it isn't useful. So it's just hard. I think it's just hard. People don't have a ton of time to devote to this, and it requires a lot of time.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think that I totally get it. I mean, I think what we could do, I'll take a look again at that template and see if we can't make it a little bit more streamlined.
More user-friendly.
Yeah, I'm going to wait until after the Supreme Court rules though.
Yeah, exactly. We may not even need it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Rich. Okay, real quick, a word on exemptions. So I know we've heard a lot about medical or religious exemptions. Medical exemptions to the vaccine are pretty straightforward because they typically require some sort of physician to sign off on it. And that's well documented. And if you have one of those, I would make sure the request is in writing. The physician has provided a signed statement, and then keep that in the personnel protected health information section of their personnel file. But they still have to comply if this goes forward with any sort of mask or testing rules that either you put in place or the government does. The religious exemption is a little bit different, and nobody is real keen on pushing back on people around religious beliefs. However, it is not intended to be a get out of jail free card if somebody objects to the vaccine. So the ADA, which is the law that governs these accommodations based on medical or religious beliefs, they have what's called an undue hardship standard that's pretty stringent when it comes to medical reasons, but it's not real stringent when it comes to religious exemptions. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I can't get I can't comply with your vaccine policy or your test or mask policy because I have a religious exemption, the bar is pretty low for you as an employer to say, you know what, this is going to cause us this is going to cost us money. This is going to, this accommodation is going to disrupt business. It's, depending on what your situation is. I know everybody's different and I know your setup is different, but you have a bit more wiggle room when there's a religious exemption. I'm not suggesting that all of religious exemptions are bogus. I'm just saying that it's not quite the same threshold when it comes to religious versus medical exemptions per the ADA. Okay, so enforcement of the ETS, from what I've read, and again, this could very well change, is around $13,000 in fines. I think that's like I said here, per violation. Now, how the OSHA finds out about violations is a whole nother story, but presumably it's the same way that they find out about asbestos violations or any other type of violation. It comes from an employee or comes from someone who's familiar with the situation. So I'm not sure how that's going to shake out, but obviously that's a very important factor.
And Rich posted another little thing.
Whoops.
It's a good start, but it still leaves plenty of questions open. Y'all are doing great. It's just impossible to know if we're hitting an unclear mark of good enough, which totally makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just so much up in the air, and what I would do, so what I'm showing now is what's on OSHA's FAQ page about what their sort of the timeline of deliverables, if you will. So it's really up to you all if, this decision for employers right now is, do you want to wait and see, or do you want to go ahead and get some stuff taken care of? And there's really no right or wrong answer. It's just a matter of how much time and energy and what you think will be, if this does go forward and February 9th is the compliance date, what does that look like for your team? Is that a relatively easy thing to accomplish? Is it going to be a big lift? What does that look like? So, and again, we don't know what's going to happen with the Supreme Court. So if I were an employee or employer with 100 or more employees, I would start to get some ducks in a row and sort of look and see how these things are going to play out. Maybe form a little committee, interior committee, that's going to be the driving force behind all of this, delegate, collaborate, etc. But yeah, I mean, the OSHA ETS is hundreds of pages long, and they have an FAQ page, which I encourage you to check out. And they have started saying, timestamping when they update the information. So that's helpful, because that's another thing, is that when these agencies update or change information, we don't necessarily know unless they tell us. So anyway, this list is on the FAQ page. So here's a checklist if you want to go ahead and get prepared in case this goes through. These are some of the things that I would recommend: creating that policy, determining how you will collect vaccine information, prepare for weekly testing, how many employees will have to produce a test, what day of the week that will be on, is there a lab nearby that you can collaborate with to make it more turnkey? I know BetterMed and Quest Diagnostics have return to work and testing mandate systems set up so that they can work with employers to make it, quote unquote, easy for employees to come get a test every Monday morning or whatever the day of the week is that works for you. Number 4 here is you could consider a mandatory vaccine policy to avoid the testing requirement altogether. That's completely up to you. And I think if you do that, you should probably have an attorney review it. And then number 5 is really important. Make sure once you communicate your policy to your employees to outline a process for accommodation requests, so that they know exactly who to go to if they have any sort of questions or would like to submit a request for an accommodation. And then if you have an attorney, it's always good to talk to one just in case, particularly if your situation is real tricky or if you have different sort of pockets of employees that might need different types of policies. it's always good to have an attorney to review those. Okay. Tracy, I'm going to take a sip of water real quick.
Okay.
All right, switching gears. So as of January 1st, about half the states in the country changed their minimum wage. If you're one of our clients, then there's a handy tool that you can go in. It's called the Employee Salary Hourly Rate List. And it will show all of your active staff members, their current rates of pay, and the correct 2022 minimum wage rate based on each employee's respective tax location. So the rates are already in iSolved. So you can go run that report. It's not even a report, it's just a page that pops up. And go through and make sure you're compliant. If you want to see the full list of state rates, you can go to the laborlawcenter.com. They've got all of the recent changes there. And I know this is kind of hard to see, but this is what that employee salary hourly rate list looks like. So you can see I've highlighted the rate. This is the minimum wage at their work location and then their current hourly rate. Obviously, this person is being underpaid and this should be brought up to speed. So that's pretty helpful. Anything more to add on that, Tracy?
No, it is very helpful.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about ERC.
Well, fortunately, there's not a whole lot to talk about in the ERC. The ERC program did end effective September 30th, 2021. Unfortunately, they made that retroactive in November when they finally passed the Infrastructure Law Act. So we proceeded, we had employees, we had clients who took advantage of the ERC in the fourth quarter. We did reach out to all of them and retract all the credits that they weren't supposed to have. If you are not one of our clients and you did take part of the ERC, the government did ask that you pay that back by the 20th of December. And then at that point, they would not penalize you. So that I think has pretty much, that ship has pretty much sailed. There are actually, I should say, there are still some fourth quarter credits if you are a startup business, but that would only be the situation that you could get. And if you are a startup business, you could actually send in send us an email to customer service and asking about the ERC for a startup business, and we can go ahead and get that in place for you. There are a couple of things in the chat and the Q&A, so let me just put this out here. Rich said, one idea, Dominion create a resource page with policy template links, free testing sites, etc. And then Carrie said, Dominion would not override any local city prevailing wages, would it? Example, Santa Fe. We actually don't override anything. That is up to you. We just are giving you the information. That page actually gives you the information on the minimum wage. It doesn't override at all. You have to go in and change it yourself for your employees. I think that's it.
All right, take it away with the tracking.
All right, so this, we set up the tracking of vaccination status and COVID testing under miscellaneous fields. So let me show you what that kind of looks like. Thank you. So the first thing is we need to give client admin access to miscellaneous fields. So you want to check and see if you have access to that. What you'll do is go under employee management, employee maintenance, and then scroll down to miscellaneous fields. So if you don't see that when you log in, you don't have access to the miscellaneous fields, and you'll want to ask to have that access. You can just send an email to customer service and they can have that turned on for you. All right, once that's been done, you'll need to go about granting your employees and or managers and supervisors access to miscellaneous fields to be able to enter information. It is a two-step process. So under self-service roles, we have to give employees actually access to see the screen miscellaneous fields. Now, you may have other miscellaneous fields that you don't want your employees to have access to. Maybe you have some questions about benefits. You may have questions about any of number of things that you don't really want your employees to see for no reason other than it clutters up the miscellaneous field screen. So miscellaneous fields actually have to be given access to individually. So once you go out, you tell us who you want to have access to that field. Usually what we do for these is we just give employees the access. We don't actually give managers and supervisors because it should be between the employee and HR admin or the client admins. That's usually who needs to be able to see this kind of stuff. But it is on a field by field basis. So giving them access to the screen does not give them access to all the fields, only what you determine they need access to. Okay, so this is what the miscellaneous field screen could look like to those who have access. So you can see here that I have for COVID vaccination status. You can have anything pretty much put in that drop down. So what I've seen so far is vaccinated, partially vaccinated, unvaccinated, choose not to answer. Then vaccination type would be obviously Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, the date of their first dose, the date of their second dose, the date of their booster, whether or not they uploaded their vaccine card. You can also have, if you want to have exemptions put in there, or you can have this vaccine notes where you can just type in religious exemption. I also have remote worker that we can put on there that you can check off. So there's any number of things that we can put on this miscellaneous fields for your employees to answer. The reporting, so a custom HR report can be written to capture all the data. So this one is for vaccination status. These would be all of the active employees, and it will tell you whatever it is you want to have access to. Like in this case, it shows the vaccine status. Then you can filter out those who are fully vaccinated to kind of touch base with the ones that aren't vaccinated or haven't answered. Really is what you're looking for, is the people who haven't gone in and answered. So that's what they use this for. There's also another report in our system that will actually allow you to look at any documents that have been uploaded, which is super helpful. All right, so uploading a COVID-19 vaccine card. So we can add a subcategory to confidential PHI and the EE uploads if necessary. So if you wanted to have like COVID-19 vaccine as your subcategory, we can certainly do that. Again, if your employees are using the new UI, they have the ability to upload their vaccine cards under confidential PHI, which is great. And if they go to the testing and they have to test, they can also upload their test results here under confidential PHI straight from their new UI. If you don't, then they have to go to EE uploads, and an HR admin will have to change the category to confidential PHI. So this is where I was talking about the documents on files. So to quickly see what documents employees have on file, and this could be for anything that you're looking for. You know, if you have people who needed to upload their driver's license and because you have a fleet of drivers, this would be a great way to look for that. It can't obviously tell you that they have uploaded that particular document. It can only tell you that something was uploaded as the vaccine card. You would have to go in and look at them if you wanted to make sure that that had happened, because you know, they could upload a picture of Mickey Mouse and say that it was their vaccine card, but until you actually go in and look at it. So anyway, you want to navigate to employee admin tools, employee analytics, documents on file, use the filters to get the data that you need. Access to employee docs. So employees actually get to determine who has access to their uploaded documents. They do not get to exclude access to a client user. I will say this though, that when these come up, usually not permitted is the access that is the default, and the employee should definitely change their own access to either read only or full access. If they don't do that, then once they've uploaded the vaccine card or any test results, it actually disappears from their view. So it'll be uploaded and then it'll look like there's nothing there. So they need to change it to full access or read access only. I typically tell them to do full access so that if they mess up, then they can delete it and add something else. So anyway, I'm just showing you, and the center part is how an admin can edit the parameters regarding an employee upload. So they've just pressed edit and then they can move it to a different category. Oh, and I should say that too. However, if you have client users within your organization that you do not want to have access to certain document categories, you can have their access restricted. You need to contact customer service to have that done though. Okay, tracking the COVID testing. It's going to be under miscellaneous data sets. Again, we have to give them access to the screen. And then again, the fields aren't available unless you tell us which fields you want to have available. So it's a two-step process, one to have access to the screen and the other one to actually see the miscellaneous data sets. So here's what it would look like. So down in below, you see where you can press add new. You'd put in the COVID test date and then the COVID results. And then it would join this whole set of data. And then you can have email alerts and employee messages sent out to trigger those who are regularly tested. So under the document tabs, in employee messages, you can add a document that regularly tested employees can electronically acknowledge, stating that they've uploaded or turned into human resources any required documentation for that week. That document should be marked as requires acknowledgement. And email alerts can be set to go out each day, so there's a constant reminder to the employee to provide the correct documentation. And once that document is acknowledged, the email alert will cease for that week. Here's the reporting to show how you can get the test results. And I have this one where it's showing all the test results for every week, but you can have it done so that it only shows the test results for that week that you're actually interested in. And that's it. I know, right?
What, I can't see. Are there any questions?
Let's see. Will this webinar be posted somewhere in Dominion? Yes, it will. It'll be up by the end of the day today.
Yeah, well, I want to go back and look at the CDC slides first, but yes, it'll be up by the end of the day today, slides and audio.
Okay, great. Anybody have anything else? Happy to answer. Or submit your questions to questions@dominionpayroll.com. Kim said, where will it be found? So you have to hit the COVID resource page. There's like a green bar on our main website. Isn't that where we're still going?
Yes.
And then you'll see, once you hit the green bar, then you can go to webinars. Is that right?
And just scroll down to where you see, I think it's, it'll be in HR Matters. You'll see the image that was on the title slide for this.
The main thing is to hit that green COVID resource bar. That takes you to the right place. All right.
Thank you,
I think that's it. Yeah, good talking with you.
All right. Hopefully I'll get to see you next week.
All right. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.